Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift through time. Not the measured kind with ticking clocks, but the soft, crumbling kind that smells like ancient stone and forgotten incense. You're going to walk where no one has stepped in thousands of years, through ruins so buried in silence, even the wind forgets their names. The gods we'll meet tonight were once real to someone. They answered prayers, received offerings, and sometimes, if they were in the mood, whispered back. Now, most of them are footnotes, or less. This is a sleep story, sure, but it's also a ghost story, except the ghosts aren't people. They're deities. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's kind of amazing seeing where in the world we all drift off together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing before a stairway carved into ancient stone. It's just wide enough for one person, and the edges have long since surrendered to time. Below, a darkness curls upward like steam, velvety, quiet, and warm. You take your first step. The only sound is the crunch of sand beneath your feet and the faintest echo of your own breath, trailing behind like a shadow. This is not any known temple. It's a fusion of 100 ruined places, half imagined, half remembered. A door slumps from one hinge, carved with symbols that feel almost familiar. You run your fingers along the edge of a faded relief, a figure with 3 arms, a bird's head, and what looks like a tree sprouting from its spine. Not a god from any book you've read. But it was. Once, the air shifts, and with it, the whispers start. They don't speak a language you know, but the tone is unmistakable, reverent, longing, tired. You pass archways collapsed under their own ambition and find a crumbling plaque bearing the name Tilazani, a name that no living person has likely spoken in centuries. Historians still argue whether names like these are mistranslations, folk memory, or something else entirely. But in moments like this, facts feel like paper held up to a bonfire. What matters is the presence. And Telazani is here. You descend deeper, the walls growing narrower. A fresco catches your eye. It shows a crowd of humans laying down offerings, tiny carved fish, baskets of glowing grain, and small blue stones. Above them hovers a being with 5 eyes and a glowing crown, receiving their gifts with an open mouth but no hands. Creepy, a little, but oddly comforting too. Here's a quirky thing. In several forgotten civilizations, like the Vincha culture and the ancient marshland dwellers of Kuwait, archaeologists have found figurines that defy classification, not clearly male or female, often with animal traits or positioned in gestures of ambiguous meaning. Some say they're dolls, others proto-gods. You reach a wide, circular chamber. The ceiling has long since collapsed, and a shaft of moonlight spills in like liquid silver. All around you are stone thrones. empty, cracked, but still emanating an energy that prickles your skin. Each throne bears a different sigil, spirals, arrows, sunbursts, and a strange triple hook shape that reminds you of something you saw once in a tattoo shop window. Weird how things echo, isn't it? There's a moment of absolute stillness here, like time pausing to take a breath. You sit on a broken step, letting your shoulders relax. The warmth of the stones radiates up through you. You wonder how many gods were born in moments like this. In silence, in starlight, in the awe of being alive. One of the thrones has carvings of animals long extinct. A giant deer, a crocodile with feathered legs, a bear with 2 heads. It's tempting to laugh, but honestly, humans are weird, and gods are often just us. Amplified, mythologized, given claws or wings or unreasonable tempers. There's no plaque here, no pamphlet, no gift shop explaining which deities sat where. And maybe that's the point. Tonight, you're not here to be taught. You're here to remember, or at least to let remembering happen through you. The moonbeam shifts, falling directly on a low pedestal in the center. There's nothing on it now, but the dust has settled in a ring, like something circular once rested here. Maybe a crown, maybe a bowl, maybe someone's last prayer. You lie back, eyes to the stars peeking through the broken roof, and think of all the names that once meant salvation. Names now erased by time, politics, war, or simply boredom. You whisper one, just to see how it feels. Talazani. And somewhere deep below this ruin, something shifts in response. You don't wake up. You simply drift forward. The stone beneath you has vanished, and now your feet sink into warm, soft earth. The scent of something ancient fills the air. Fire smoke, baked clay, and a hint of animal fat left too long in the sun. Around you, the world changes shape. Subtly at first, walls melt into reeds, arches crumble into ziggurats, and suddenly you're standing in the hazy lowlands of Sumer. It's dawn, probably. The sky is the color of a bruised peach, and the river glistens with thick silver like some lazy god spilled mercury down the spine of the world. In the distance, the twin towers of a mud-brick temple scrape upward, crumbling but proud. Welcome to the city of Lagash, one of Sumer's lost jewels, home to trade, kings, and gods long since swallowed by silence. But you're not here for the famous ones. Not tonight. Forget Inanna. Forget Enlil. Tonight, your path leads to the quieter divinities, those barely remembered, whispered only in crumbling tablets and broken statues. Gods like Nanshi, the Lady of the Marshes. She once ruled over water, fertility, and dreams, kind of like the ultimate work-life balance icon. Nanshi had the vibes of a cosmic HR rep crossed with a sea witch. She cared for widows and orphans, interpreted dreams, and apparently had strong opinions about whether fish should be taxed. Yes, really. You pass her shrine. It's low to the ground, carved into the bank of the canal, nearly overtaken by bulrushes. A child's figurine sits half buried in the mud, wide-eyed, big-eared, arms raised as if asking, "Why did everyone forget me?" Historians still argue whether Nanshi was ever part of the main pantheon, or merely a localized goddess. But evidence from cuneiform records suggests she had courts of her own, temples filled with singing, and festivals where women wore fish-scale jewelry and drank honey beer until the rivers seemed to giggle. Deeper in the city, beyond the crumbled ziggurat steps and lizard-choked courtyards, you reach a space the scribes never mentioned. A wall carved with a strange spiral you swear you've seen in your dreams. And beneath it, a name. Dumuzid. But not the shepherd version known from mythology. No, this is Dumuzid the Fisher, a fringe interpretation preserved only in 2 fragmented tablets that scholars still bicker about on obscure forums. In this version, Dumuzid is not Inanna's tragic husband, but a lonely river god who teaches fishermen how to bait with song. He wears robes made of woven net and walks with a staff shaped like a shrimp. According to one scroll fragment, he cursed an entire village with eternal fog because someone mocked his singing voice. Honestly, respect. You sit beside what was once his pool, now just a dip in the earth, where worshippers dropped copper coins and oyster shells. You reach down, brush away the dirt, and find a shard of blue pottery. Still slick, still warm. Here's something quirky. Several Sumerian deities were later absorbed or split into multiple personas as dynasties rose and fell. One god might morph into 3 or vanish entirely, depending on who was in charge. Divine branding was a nightmare. Think of it as ancient reboots, except instead of new actors, they rewrote entire cosmologies. As you move through the winding alleys of this ghost city, the sun climbs higher, but it feels no warmer. Time folds strangely here. You step over discarded sandals, see stone rings embedded in old courtyards, and pause at a cracked relief of a creature with bird talons and a cow's smile. No one remembers its name, but it watches you go. You pass scribes' quarters, low, soot-stained rooms, once filled with clay tablets. A few still remain, untouched, somehow immune to erosion. You brush the dust away and read a name. Kiri-Tu, the scribe goddess of forgotten words. No one's mentioned her in over 3,000 years. But her story is etched in this room like graffiti from a divine intern. It's said Kiri-Tu would sneak into temples at night and reorder the prayers, changing their meanings ever so slightly. Worshippers would ask for rain and get frogs, beg for peace and get suspiciously timed marriages. She was a chaos editor, and some even blamed her for the fall of Eridu. Historians still debate whether Kiri-Tu was a deity, a folk joke among scribes, or something darker. But the fact remains. Her name appears in temple records, and always near moments of curious disaster. You leave the scribe house and step into an open plaza. It's empty now, except for one statue half swallowed by sand. A woman, cloaked in fish scales, holding a jug upside down. No water flows. But for a moment, you think you hear the splash. You sit there, imagining what prayers once filled this square. a merchant thanking the gods for safe passage, a widow cursing the wind that took her husband, a child asking for a dream. And all of them, every voice, offered to gods no one remembers. But tonight, you do. You remember Nanshe, Dumuzid the fisher, Kiritu the trickster scribe. You hold their names in your mouth like pebbles, smooth and strange. And you whisper them into the air as you rise and walk onward. You walk east now, through shifting sands and vanishing maps, until you find yourself standing atop a high bluff, overlooking a vast and dusty plain. Below, scattered across the sunburnt earth, lies a ghost of a city. Akkad. It isn't like Sumer, with its sleepy canals and marshland gods. No, Akkad once throbbed with ambition, built by kings who wanted the world, ruled by laws written in iron, and prayed to gods who answered with thunder. Or, at least, that's what the tablets say. The air is drier here. You feel it in your throat, taste it like powdered brick. Statues lie broken, their heads snapped off, their eyes buried in rubble. But even in ruins, this place exudes power. You walk its wide roads, roads that once bore the weight of armies and golden chariots, and feel a quiet hum, like memory buzzing beneath your feet. Tonight, you're here to meet the watchers of Akkad. They weren't kings or priests or even high gods. No, these were the lesser deities, the divine functionaries who lived in the margins of stone tablets. Gods of ink, of whisper, of divine logistics. It's said they recorded the fate of cities not in words, but in breath. The first you meet is Eshru, god of timing. His symbol was a cracked sundial, his temples tiny alcoves carved into the backs of ziggurats. Merchants once prayed to him to delay storms, stretch shadows, or accidentally prolong lunar festivals for tax purposes. He was subtle, never painted large, but his cult spread quietly among scribes and midwives. The few surviving prayers to Eshru are carved in minuscule script, so small archaeologists once mistook them for decorative edging. Historians still argue whether Eshru was a real deity or a metaphor for bureaucratic frustration. But one thing is certain. During the final years of Akkad, his name appears more often, like someone hoping time would slow down before it all fell apart. You step into what was once an archive. Stone shelves, long since toppled, lie in crisscrossing ruin. Amid the debris, you spot a wall mural, barely visible. It shows a group of masked figures sitting in a circle, passing what looks like a scroll of wind from one to the next. No names, just symbols. Each god represented by a color, deep green, pale gold, black like cooled lava. One figure is unique. She has no mouth, just a thin veil where her lips should be. This is Meluha, the listener. Her job, to absorb the prayers that were never spoken, the fears people swallowed, the silent screams. It's said that in Akkad, people left offerings for her by standing in stillness for 3 full minutes. No speaking, no movement, just presence. Honestly, the most introvert-friendly religion in history. You crouch beside the mural and touch the wall, half expecting to hear something. Instead, you feel a soft vibration beneath your fingers. Not a sound, a pulse. You stay like that for a while. Breathing, listening, as Meluha once did. Then comes the oddest moment of your night. A breeze swirls through the room, kicking up ash and dry leaves. And within it, a scent. Not incense, not smoke, cinnamon. It wraps around you, warm and unexpected, as if a baker god had passed by. You blink, and there it is, a tiny stone carving, no taller than your hand, tucked beneath a broken step. A chubby figure with 3 arms and a cinnamon roll for a crown. You've just met Urbak, the kitchen god of lost recipes. Akkadian families used to invoke him before large feasts, especially during the New Moon Festival. His domain was flavor, invention, and helping you remember that one spice you forgot halfway through cooking. Most people today don't even know his name, but his likeness appears scratched into household hearths. And once, someone even found a clay figurine of him inside a preserved bread oven. Some scholars laugh at Urbak's supposed divinity. Others defend him fiercely, pointing to the consistent iconography and the sacred poems that describe the warm god with hands of salt. It's possible, honestly, that more people prayed to Urbak than to the war gods. After all, not everyone battles, but everyone eats. You sit in the ruins of an Akkadian kitchen, letting the cinnamon scent fade. The dust glows gold in the low sunlight. The silence is complete. You wonder how many of these gods died not with war, but with forgetfulness. One day, someone simply didn't light the incense, didn't teach their child the prayer, didn't leave the offering on the shelf. And so the god shrank and vanished, and the wind took their name. But tonight, you are the wind. You whisper their names, Eshru, Meluha, Urbak, and feel them float outward, brushing the shattered rooftops and stone roads like a memory finally remembered. The wind carries you now, not away, but sideways. The sun shifts, its angle warping until the light grows thick and golden and heavy with heat. You are no longer among ziggurats and stone scrolls. The air here smells of sand, of spice, and something floral that doesn't quite have a name. Insects hum lazily. You are in Egypt, but not the postcard version. Not pyramids and the polished corridors of Giza. No, you're deep in the outer provinces, walking a cracked road lined with fallen sycamores. This is a side of ancient Egypt the tourists never saw. No grandeur, just dust and memory. You pass mud brick homes, low temples abandoned by pharaohs, and broken obelisks that tilt like exhausted giants. Here, forgotten gods once thrived. Quieter ones, weirder ones, sometimes gentler, sometimes not. You turn a corner and stop. There's a figure carved into the wall, no taller than your chest. Not regal, not imposing. He's squat, with a lion's mane for hair, a pot belly, and a perpetual toothy grin. Meet Bess, protector of the home, childbirth, dreams, and, let's be honest, someone who probably started the trend of ugly, cute deities. Bess was never a big temple god, but in bedrooms, kitchens, and baby cribs, he reigned supreme. People painted him on mirrors, carved him on furniture, and wore little Bess amulets to keep away nightmares and scorpions. He danced, played tambourines, stuck his tongue out at demons, and made children laugh, which, if we're being real, might be the most divine job of all. Historians still argue whether Bess was a single god or a title worn by many protective spirits. His origin may stretch beyond Egypt, possibly into Nubia or even earlier desert tribes. But one thing is certain: his face has been found everywhere, from palace walls to broken hair combs. A quirk you'll love. Some ancient Egyptian dancers tattooed Bess on their thighs for luck during performances. You stand there a moment, just imagining the world's oldest pop concert. A cat slinks past your foot, silent, aloof, unimpressed. You follow it. The temple you find next is barely a room. Vines choke the doorway. The roof is gone, and the altar has been claimed by nesting birds. But carved into the back wall is a name you barely recognize: Meretseger. Not one of the glamorous goddesses. No love poems for her. No perfume-scented scrolls. Meretseger was the cobra of the peak, a local deity who watched over the Valley of the Kings. She wasn't here to bless you. She was here to warn you. Thieves and gravediggers feared her. It said she could strike you blind, sick, or mad if you disrespected the dead. You crouch before her faded image, a coiled serpent with a woman's face, fangs bared and crown askew. Oddly maternal in the way some teachers are, strict, stern, but not cruel. The kind who let you know exactly what would happen if you crossed the line. But still, people prayed to her for mercy, because forgiveness, when it came, meant everything. A few workers in Deir el-Medina, a village of tomb builders, left prayers to her etched into cliff walls. "Forgive me, Great One. My hand slipped. I did not mean harm." Their fear was real, their respect. Deeper still, you trace a finger over her name. Not erased, but faded from use, forgotten in favor of more photogenic deities. You wonder how many divine beings died not with violence, but with marketing neglect. The breeze shifts again, and with it comes a surprising laugh. Yes, an actual laugh. It startles you. You follow the sound. Down a hidden path lies a shrine unlike any you've seen. Covered in wildflowers, it looks like a place teenagers would sneak into today. Graffiti covers the walls, not modern, but ancient. Quick sketches, vulgar jokes, symbols of fertility, mischief, and joy. Welcome to the domain of Tayet, an obscure weaving goddess who doubled as a protector of dreams. Not much is known about her. Most of what scholars believe comes from lullaby fragments and patterns found woven into baby blankets buried with infants. One scholar proposed that Tayet may have been imagined by mothers rather than priests. A grassroots goddess, homemade divine, which is kind of beautiful when you think about it. You sit in her shrine, letting the floral scent wrap around you. It smells like chamomile and sleep. You imagine a mother, thousands of years ago, humming a tune with Tayet's name stitched into the melody. And just like that, she's real again. Here's something fun. Archaeologists once found a toy carved with the name Tay beneath a collapsed roof in southern Egypt. No context, no documentation. Just a child's toy. Maybe the only surviving evidence of a dream goddess who kept one little sleeper safe. As the sun dips lower, casting gold light across cracked stone and desert blooms, you feel their presence all around you. Bess, dancing in the shadows. Meretziger, watching from the cliffs. Tayet, humming lullabies to the wind. They were never meant to rule kingdoms. They didn't demand blood or thunder, but they mattered. In bedrooms, kitchens, back alleys, and quiet prayer. And tonight, they rise again, just for you. Your steps grow softer now, and the ground shifts again from sand to salt-crusted stone, to uneven rock polished by centuries of sea wind. You smell brine in the air, taste the ocean before you even see it. Then, waves, crashing softly below the cliff where you stand. The coast is rugged, jagged, and ancient. Welcome to the forgotten harbors of the Phoenicians. This place doesn't whisper, it hums. The ocean carries stories, long ones, winding and cryptic like kelp in the tide. The Phoenicians were sailors, traders, masters of purple dye and unsolvable alphabets. They mapped coastlines the way monks mapped prayers, and along every port, they left altars, small ones, hidden ones, sometimes just 3 stones stacked with intention. But those stones meant everything, because the sea is greedy, and if you wanted to survive it, you needed the right gods. You follow a weathered path along the cliff, down to a narrow dock where time stopped trying. There's a broken statue at the edge. Male form, crown of feathers, 1 foot slightly raised, like he was about to step back into the waves. His name? Melkart. Melkart was the protector of Tyre, a god of kings, sailors, and the wild fire that forges courage. Some say he was an early form of Heracles. Others say he was his own beast entirely, born from smoke and salt, carrying a club wrapped in flames. He was worshipped on ships, in market squares, and sometimes with rituals involving, let's call it intense heat and voluntary firewalking. Yeah, these folks weren't subtle. Historians still argue whether Melkart was purely Phoenician or a fusion god, morphed through contact with Greeks and Egyptians. Either way, his altars stretched from modern-day Lebanon to the edges of Spain. You find one such altar now, a stone slab barely visible beneath thorny vines. Charcoal blackens the center. There's a line of faded carvings across the top. You brush the moss away and read a name almost lost. Baal Saphon, the storm watcher. He was the sea god, the lightning sender, the one you begged for mercy when the waves turned unfriendly. While Melkart protected the soul, Baal Zephon protected the hull. You step back and imagine it. A crew of sailors, kneeling before departure, whispering prayers into the wind, tossing salt into the flames. The waves crashing like the breath of gods. It's all too easy to believe, isn't it? A quick side note. One quirky belief tied to Baal Zephon was that he could trap winds in a bag. Yes, literally. Sailors carried knotted leather pouches they claimed were blessed to hold favorable winds. They'd only untie them when desperate, like some divine air freshener. Functional, terrifying, and vaguely adorable. You leave the dock and climb a winding stone stair. At the top, nestled in the cliffside, is a tiny cave, its walls soot-stained, its ceiling covered in shell necklaces and faded red pigment. This was a shrine to Astarte, goddess of fertility, war, and the sea's secrets. Often called the Queen of Heaven. But here's the thing. Astarte was huge. A-lister, red carpet goddess. So why is her shrine here? In a cave barely big enough for a toddler and a goat? Because this isn't her shrine, it's for the nameless goddess beneath her. You read a line scratched into the rock. To she who sinks what was unfaithful. Charming. This cave belonged to an aspect of Astarte that never got a title, just fear. Sailors swore she followed ships that carried lies or forbidden cargo. If the crew wasn't truthful about their offerings, she'd drag the whole boat down. Brutal honesty, Ocean Edition. A few weather-beaten trinkets remain in the offering niche. A silver coin, a half-burned candle, and what looks suspiciously like a chicken feather tied to a fishhook. You don't ask questions. And yet, even in her terrifying anonymity, there's something grounding about her. She was fairness in chaos, a cosmic customs agent, and in a world ruled by tides, that kind of presence was oddly comforting. You sit at the edge of the cliff now, the wind in your hair, the ocean stretching endlessly into shadow. The Phoenicians are gone. Their language barely survives. Their cities are ruins, their gods museum footnotes. But tonight, Melkart stands again. Baal Zephon whispers to the wind, and she who sinks listens from her cave with a calm, ancient smirk. You imagine her watching your dreams like she once watched the waves, making sure you don't lie to yourself as you drift into sleep. You wake to the sound of birdsong, not modern chirps from trees outside your window, but a more primitive, flute-like melody, echoing faintly across stone and sea. The air is thick with warmth, but not hot. It smells of olives, limestone, and fire-roasted grain. You've arrived somewhere older than memory, older even than language, and yet deeply human. You're standing on a rocky island in the middle of the Aegean Sea, surrounded by ruins with no name. This is not Greece. At least, not yet. Before Apollo claimed Delos, before Athena ruled Athens, there were other gods, older gods, stranger gods, gods carved in soft stone, shaped like women without faces, or serpents with breasts, or birds with spiral eyes. These are the silent gods of the Aegean, those whose names never made it into Homer's verses, but live deeply in the bodies of islanders. You walk through an overgrown orchard. Gnarled fig trees, their roots tangled through broken walls, reach toward the sky like arthritic fingers. Beneath one, you spot a statue. Just a torso, no arms, no head. It's worn smooth, but unmistakably feminine. The hips wide, the belly full. She looks less like a person and more like the concept of birth turned into stone. She's one of the cycladic figurines, thousands of which have been found across the islands. Archaeologists still argue whether they were gods, funerary symbols, or extremely avant-garde dolls. But the craftsmanship, the repetition, the reverence, they all whisper, someone worshipped her. A quirky note. Some ancient islanders buried these figures face down beneath their homes, possibly as protection. Imagine living above a silent stone goddess, watching you from the floorboards. Cozy. You sit beside one now, half buried in reeds. Her face is blank. No eyes, no mouth. And yet, you feel watched. Not in a creepy way, more like when you're alone in a forest, but know the trees remember you. Further inland, you find a circle of stones, an ancient shrine, long since overtaken by grass and bees. At its center lies a flat altar, stained with time. The remains of painted symbols flicker like ghosts beneath the moss. Spirals, twin moons, a handprint? No one knows what these mean anymore. But once, they told stories. Stories of harvests, storms, fertility, and sorrow. Here, you meet the bee god, unnamed, unrecorded, but theorized from amulets and carvings found on Crete and Thera. Some believe she was the mother of all hive minds, the one who taught humans how to organize, to build, to dance as one. Her worshippers may have worn honeycomb-patterned veils and offered sweet wine laced with herbs. Historians still argue whether she was a localized cult or part of a broader, pan-Aegean deity network. You kneel near the altar, watching bees drift lazily between cracked statues. One lands on your hand and simply rests there. It doesn't sting. It just is. That's how these gods feel, not active or angry or benevolent, just present, watching, remembering. Down a winding path, you reach a collapsed hut carved into the cliffside. Inside, shadows stretch long, even in daylight. On the back wall is a faded mural of a woman with the lower half of a dolphin and hair made of seaweed. She holds a shell to her lips like a trumpet. Beneath her, a row of kneeling figures offer her cups, fish, and something that looks suspiciously like cheese. This is Thalassa, or rather, the shape who would one day become her. Sea goddesses often begin as local spirits, tide whispers turned myth. This one, she may have only ever existed on this one island. Her name appears nowhere else. But her image, variations of it, was found in 4 separate homes here. That's enough for faith. You step back out into the light and gaze across the sea. Each island you can see was once its own kingdom, its own religion, its own world. The Greeks later gathered them all up like marbles, but once Every bay had its own guardian, every mountain its own breath. One more thing catches your eye: a weather-worn tablet jammed between two stones. On it, a rough carving of three figures, one with a bird head, one with many breasts, and one simply a flame. No names. Just a title scratched below them: The First Three. The locals believed these were the first beings ever worshipped here, older than even the gods, closer to nature's raw pulse, more forces than personalities, more dream than deity. You trace their image with your fingers. The stone is warm, as if it still remembers. You rest for a moment on the edge of the altar circle, the wind brushing your hair. You hear waves below, the hush of bees above, and the soft nothing of gods who no longer demand worship, but still hold your gaze. They were never written in myths, but tonight you carry them. You descend from the windswept cliffs, your feet brushing over stone softened by millennia of salt and time. The air thickens with warmth and the musky scent of olive oil, beeswax, and earth. You're no longer on some remote, god-haunted island. You're in the heart of Crete now, stepping into a place woven with shadow and spiral. Knossos. This is not the Knossos of guidebooks. No tour buses, no souvenir shops selling replicas of the Minotaur. This is Knossos before myth got rebranded, when its gods still walked with wet hooves and twisted smiles, and their names hadn't yet been rewritten into cautionary tales. You pass a low wall painted with fading murals, human figures, all female, eyes wide, arms raised. Around them, snakes coil like bracelets and birds flutter mid-dance. These are the serpent goddesses of Minoan faith, part priestess, part deity, part unknowable. Their power came not from thrones, but from the soil, the hearth, the body, and their symbols still whisper from shards of pottery buried in kitchen floors. You crouch near one such fragment, red clay with a painted curve like a question mark. Archaeologists call it ritualistic, which, to be fair, is their favorite term for we have no idea. But here's what we do know. Snake imagery in Knossos wasn't about fear. It was about life, regeneration, and control over death. In other words, boss energy. Historians still argue whether the snake women were actual gods or high-ranking priestesses channeling divine energy. Some theories suggest a snake goddess named Rhea, once worshipped in personal households, eventually merged with the later image of Ariadne, demoted to mortal love interest of a monster slayer. Oof, tough downgrade. The courtyard you enter next is unsettling. The architecture seems wrong. Angles don't add up. Corridors double back. Light falls strangely. You're inside the labyrinth, or at least what's left of the myth behind it. Before it became the maze of the Minotaur, this place was a religious complex, possibly a ceremonial space where sacred dances told stories older than language. And at its heart was not a beast, but a bull-headed god. Not a monster, not a punishment, a protector. His name is mostly lost, but some inscriptions refer to Tarokath, the one who breathes through horns, That sounds like a brass band gone rogue. But in truth, he was a fertility god tied to rain and the cycle of the harvest. Bulls were sacred, not feared, and leaping over them wasn't about sport, but transcendence, a literal vault into divine presence. You step into the center of the ruins. The ground is marked with deep grooves, possibly from ancient chariots, or perhaps from processions of barefoot dancers repeating steps until the stone gave way. Nearby, an old well hums with an inexplicable chill. You lean over the edge and hear, humming, not wind, not echoes, something else. A quirky note. Some researchers found a bronze bell buried near this well, shaped like a bull's hoof with tiny wings. No inscriptions, no explanation, but someone wore it. Someone believed it meant protection. You move on, and the walls close in. This part of the ruins isn't on any map. You're in a forgotten annex of Knossos, a corridor of collapsed pillars and half-lit murals. And here you meet a figure erased from every myth you've ever known. A triple-faced goddess, staring out in three directions: maiden, mother, crone. She holds a fruit in one hand, a blade in another, and in the third, nothing, just an open palm. She may be pre-Hecate, or a lost version of Potnia, the mistress of animals. No one's sure. Her name doesn't survive. But her presence thrums through the ruins. Some say she was worshipped in secret groves. Others say she lived in kitchens and watched over births. But always, she came in threes. You linger before her mural. Her three faces flicker in the torchlight. One smiles, one grieves, one waits. You whisper thanks, and as you do, you hear the faint sound of bells, like the one from the well, only lighter, more distant. It's almost time to leave Knossos, but not before you pass one final relic. A crumbling pillar covered in a pattern that repeats over and over. Spiral, spiral, eye, star. This was not just decoration. It was prayer. The kind that works better when you trace it with your fingertip. So you do. And for a moment, you feel something breathe beneath the stone. The gods of Knossos were never loud. They didn't hurl thunderbolts or start wars. They came in dreams, in patterns, in shared breath and silent dances. And tonight, they rise from their spirals, just long enough to remember your name. You leave the maze of Knossos behind, but its spirals linger in your mind. The path ahead is no longer paved, just dirt and scattered pebbles, winding through dry hills beneath a lavender sky. Your breath comes slower now. The night is deeper. The stars prick the heavens like forgotten runes, and the air hums with the scent of time and old fire. You're in the lands of the Hittites now. Not the empires you hear about in school. Not the ones locked in battles with Ramses or chiseled into stone treaties. This is older, wilder. The highlands of Anatolia, where gods once ruled not from golden thrones, but from clouds, caves, and trees. You find a stone road leading to a half-buried ruin nestled in a valley. where the grass grows too green and the shadows hold their breath. Carved into the rock face above the entrance is the figure of a storm god, arms raised, lightning crackling from his fingers in jagged lines. This is Tarhun, the Hittite thunder deity, and tonight, he's not alone. Tarhun was the big name, sure. He hurled storms, beat dragons, and signed off on harvests. But behind him, in the folds of forest and hearth, were stranger, quieter gods, those the empire later pushed aside. One of them was Enar, goddess of wild animals, forests, and secret vengeance. She was often depicted holding leashes, yes, leashes attached to lions, wolves, or spirits shaped like shadows. Her worship was tied to the wilderness and to women who defied royal control. Some legends claimed she tricked men into entering her grove and never let them leave. Others said she was the patron of lost daughters. Honestly, iconic. Historians still argue whether Inar was a true deity or a regional spirit merged into broader Hittite myth. But stone tablets from Hattusa mention her name in oaths, curses, and wedding rituals. That's range. You enter the ruined shrine. It's more cave than temple, with dripping walls and torch niches carved like eyes. The floor is littered with animal bones, not from sacrifice, but from time. In the back lies a cracked altar, its surface scratched with what looks like a spiral of wolves. And there, in a stone niche, sits a weather-worn figurine of a woman with talons instead of hands. Her eyes are inlaid with black obsidian. You feel them even now. A quirky find. One Hittite site turned up small clay dishes bearing paw prints, dog-sized, but arranged in symbolic circles. No clear purpose, possibly offering, possibly divine dinnerware. Either way, the dogs ate well. You exit the cave and continue through a narrow pass in the hills. The air cools. The rocks change color. Reddish now, iron-rich. Humming under your feet, you're approaching the borderlands, where gods bled into each other. And that's where you find Kumarbi. If Tarhun was the thunder god, Kumarbi was his dad, a titan figure older than war, made of stone and secrets. His myth? Well, it's a lot. Let's just say it involves biting off divine genitals, giving birth through his thigh, and possibly vomiting up entire pantheons. Real tasteful bedtime material. But tonight, you're not here for his scandals. You're here for his silence. In the crags above the trail lies a secluded temple ruin with no doors, no roof. Just 4 standing stones and a slab covered in star-like carvings. It's believed that this was a sanctuary of Kumarbi the Creator, not the Destroyer. A version worshipped by shepherds and astronomers, not kings. You sit on the slab. The stone is warm beneath you. The stars above feel impossibly close. It's said that Kumarbi taught humans how to mark the heavens, how to read the passage of time in the sky. Some Hittite tablets even include protostar charts believed to be copied from temple walls like this one. If true, it means the gods didn't just rule time. They invented our way of tracking it. The wind picks up. carrying dust and the faint sound of distant flutes. You're not alone. The gods of these hills still walk at night, slower, yes, and quieter, but present. They live in fox tracks and shifting shadows, in old trees that lean just a little too far east. You stand, brush off your hands, and whisper their names. Tarhun, Einar, Kumarbi. Your breath fogs the air. The ruins seem to nod in reply. And as you walk down the hill, something soft brushes against your leg. You look down. It's a wolf pup. No leash, just eyes that shine gold in the dark. And then it's gone, into the night, like a promise you're not yet ready to understand. The hills melt behind you, replaced by a dusky horizon stretched wide and warm, like parchment left too long in the sun. The scent of cedar and burnt myrrh hangs heavy in the air. You're somewhere both sacred and bruised, an ancient land where gods were born, fought over, forgotten, and occasionally rewritten. Welcome to Canaan. This is the birthplace of gods who walk the fine line between folklore and theology, between dusty scrolls and the fire of prophecy. You stand now in a city with a name long erased. Its gates are broken, but its bones still whisper. Beneath your feet, layers of stone mark where temples once rose and fell. Each new god stacked on the bones of an older one, like theological Jenga. And, at the heart of it all, El. Yes, that El, the Father God, king of the Canaanite pantheon. His name is buried deep within many modern words for divinity: Elohim, Bethel, Israel. But El, as he was, is gone now. A god of mountaintops, bulls, and judgment delivered with soft hands and stern eyes. You enter a collapsed structure at the edge of a ruined acropolis. At first glance, it's just another temple. Stone benches, altar platform, a basin worn smooth. But the wall carvings tell a different story. A line of figures, each slightly different, kneeling before a central throne. And on the throne, a bearded man with a crescent crown, holding a staff that forks into two serpents. El, he wasn't flashy. He didn't wield thunder or ride chariots. He made decisions. He mediated between gods. He rested in his tent and whispered laws beneath fig trees. He was, in many ways, the divine embodiment of dad energy. Historians still argue whether El was a distinct figure or a generic placeholder for God in early Semitic cultures. But here, in this quiet room, the argument feels distant. Here, he is present. Beside the altar lies a broken tablet, partially legible. It mentions Asherah, his consort, a goddess of fertility, wisdom, and if you go by certain ancient inscriptions, possibly the original queen of heaven. But in time, her temples were torn down, her poles burned, her name stripped from scripture. You exit the temple and find a grove, olive trees growing wild and crooked, their roots wrapped around chunks of old idols. This was once sacred ground. Here, Asherah danced. Here, mothers brought bread, oil, and stories. Here, Love was a form of worship, not a sin. A quirky find. At Kuntilet Ajrud, archaeologists uncovered inscriptions reading Yahweh and his Asherah alongside drawings of deities sharing space. These fragments suggest a world where even the most revered monotheistic god may have once had a partner. Imagine that. Divinity as a duet. Farther into the grove, you find a low stone bench. Carved into it are tiny figures, children, animals, dancers. It's a bench for watching the stars, or maybe waiting for answers. You sit there now. The sky is turning indigo, and the wind carries a different scent. Dust and cloves and old fire. You're not alone. Across from you sits a statue so worn it could be mistaken for a rock, until you notice the faint outline of wings on its back. This is one of the divine messengers, perhaps Reshef, a god associated with plague, healing, and war. Quite the resume. He carried a bow, rode storms, and sometimes delivered justice like a cosmic courier service. His worship once stretched from Canaan to Cyprus, even influencing Egyptian belief systems. And then, he vanished, replaced by newer angels, newer messengers, whose wings were feathered differently. But tonight, Reshef leans quietly in the corner of this ruined grove. No arrows, no fire, just stillness. You look up and notice the stars forming a circle overhead, right above the grove. Not a constellation you recognize, but somehow familiar, like a map you forgot you drew. You trace it with your eyes. Around you, the trees seem to lean inward. The ruins exhale. The gods of Canaan, El, Asherah, Reshef, don't demand belief. They simply sit and watch and wait for you to remember. And tonight, you do. You press your hand into the stone of the bench. It's warm, not from sun, from memory. The grove fades, like breath on a mirror. You walk forward and feel the ground harden beneath your feet. No longer soil, but smooth, flat stone laid with precision. You've crossed into the lands of Babylon now, or at least what's left of it. The night here glows strangely. The moon casts a faint blue light over crumbling brick walls etched with lions and wings. The scent of clay and ink hangs in the air. The sound? Nothing but the whisper of dry wind slipping through empty corridors. This was once the heart of an empire, a place of towering ziggurats, jeweled gates, and gods that ruled with decimal point accuracy. But tonight, you're not here for Marduk, Babylon's divine CEO. No, you're here for the unnamed ones, gods whose temples never made the history books, but whose presence still lingers like forgotten perfume. You enter what used to be a market district, now silent and buried under dust. Stone stalls still stand. In one, barely noticeable, is a carving of a man stirring a pot. Behind him, a creature with 6 fingers holds a spoon. Above them both, a symbol shaped like a squiggly fish. No name. Just lunch? Turns out, the Babylonians had deities for nearly everything, including cooking. One such obscure figure may have been Ninkasi's counterpart, a kitchen god known only through scribbled recipes found on clay tablets. No temple, no hymns, but instructions for stew that begin with, "In the name of she who calms hunger." So yeah, divine enough. You keep walking through what must have been a schoolhouse. The walls are lined with cuneiform graffiti. One reads, "All praise to the one who finds lost tablets." Another simply says, "Curse be upon the mice." Relatable? Inside one classroom, you find a low shrine. It's decorated with bits of chalk, shards of broken styluses, and offerings of what looks like fossilized figs. This was likely the domain of a god no one dared displease, perhaps a minor scribe deity invoked by exhausted students. Some scholars refer to her as Etara, the keeper of recall. Others think she never existed outside school folklore. But honestly, any force that could help a teen remember 147 different cuneiform signs deserves worship. Historians still argue whether such micro-deities were officially sanctioned or just household spirits elevated by desperation. But the sheer number of these carvings, charms, and curses suggests belief ran deep. You exit the school and approach a small, collapsed ziggurat, barely a hill now. A shattered staircase winds halfway up before giving up. At its base stands a single pillar with something strange, a mosaic of hands. Dozens of them, all shapes and sizes, reaching upward. No heads, no bodies, just hands. It's eerie, but also reverent. This may have been a shrine to Zaghil, the forgotten god of shared labor, a deity of bakers, bricklayers, and those who worked with their hands. The idea being, each hand that builds, bakes, or writes is divine in action. Even today, some older Babylonian descendants still have proverbs that say, "Work is prayer when Zaghil watches." You climb halfway up the ziggurat remains and look out. In the distance, you see outlines of larger temples, those of Marduk, Ishtar, and Nabu. But they feel far away, detached, royal. You're here with the neighborhood gods, the communal gods, the ones with chalk on their robes and flour in their hair. A quirky fact: one clay tablet from Sippar records an annual festival where the small gods were paraded through the market on carts pulled by goats. People sang, laughed, and offered pies. Yes, pies. No blood sacrifice, just snacks. You descend and find one more relic before you go. A square stone block, polished smooth, its corners marked with glyphs for bread, light, protection, and sleep. An inscription wraps the base, for the one who listens at night. Less no known god matches that title, but imagine it. A deity whose job was to guard dreams, to keep watch as the city slept, to take in the silent thanks of bakers and scribes alike. You sit by that stone, and for a moment, the city feels alive again. Not the loud, war-hungry Babylon of textbooks, but the whispered version, the candlelit version, a place of soft rituals and humble prayers. a place where small gods mattered. You rest your hand on the stone, whisper a name you make up on the spot, just to give someone a home again. And then you move on, the quiet still pressing softly around you, like the pages of a book no one's finished. The earth beneath your feet begins to tremble, not violently, but rhythmically, like a drum beat far below the surface. You pause. The hum deepens, becoming a slow throb in the stone. You're not standing on ground anymore. You're standing on memory. You've arrived in Greece, but not the gleaming marble Greece of Socrates or golden temples. You're here to visit the gods who lost, those who ruled before Olympus, before Zeus threw lightning like a toddler with a sugar rush. Tonight, you walk among the eclipsed titans. You step into a valley choked with vines and fig trees. The walls here are rough, older than cut stone. No columns, just boulders carved with winding lines, like veins or roots. The air feels heavier. Time itself seems reluctant to pass. You follow the sound of trickling water and find a spring bubbling from a crack in the rock. It's cool, clear, and tastes faintly of iron. Beside it sits a broken statue, an eye carved in relief, surrounded by sun rays. A plaque lies beside it, barely legible. To Hyperion, light of the east. Hyperion was once the god of light, not the sun exactly, but light itself. Radiance, vision, awareness. He was the father of Helios. Sure, but in older tales. Hyperion was the sky's clarity. Before Apollo, before enlightenment became a metaphor, Hyperion simply illuminated. Historians still argue whether Hyperion was worshipped directly or simply as part of poetic tradition. But inscriptions found in mountain groves suggest that shepherds left polished stones for him, hoping for clear skies and safe paths. You wander deeper into the grove and find more traces. Here, a grove of cypress trees arranged in a perfect triangle. Beneath them, the faint carvings of a woman with spiny arms and flowing hair. Eurybia, goddess of the mastery of the sea. Not just waves, but the skill to control them. Navigation, star reading, boat building. She was power wielded with precision. You crouch beside one of her symbols, a stylized sail, etched into an ancient slab. It's weathered but elegant. A forgotten offering lies beside it, a shard of shell, polished to a mirror sheen. Eurybia never had great temples. She didn't demand feasts, but for sailors and craftsmen, she was everything. A guide, a presence. The voice that whispered, just a little more north. A quirky note. One ancient nautical manual found off the coast of Corinth mentions a salt blessing to the silent sailor, likely a reference to Eurybia. Sailors would flick seawater into the wind before departure, calling her name exactly once, anymore. And she was said to ignore you entirely. No neediness allowed. You step over a tangle of roots and into a half-collapsed cave. A flicker of blue lichen glows along the walls, and there, in the heart of it, is a jagged rock painted with crimson circles. 3 interlocking rings. Beside it, carved in jagged, almost angry lines, is a name few remember. Creus. You sit across from the rock. No statue, no altar, just wait. Creus, in some tales, was the titan of constellations and cosmic order, but also, possibly, time's edge, the part of chronology we can't perceive. He was before clocks, before myths, before reason. The Greeks never quite knew what to do with him, so they mostly didn't. He just faded. A name left off the guest list. You imagine the Titans not as loud, stomping giants, but as ideas, big ones. The kind that live in your bones, but don't always have words. Hyperion, Eurybia, Creus. They weren't discarded because they were defeated. They were forgotten because they were hard to explain. And in a world obsessed with stories that resolve cleanly, that was the greater crime. The air in the cave shifts. The lichen dims. You step out into the night again. Stars blazing above you. You look up and name them softly. Hyperion, Eurybia, Creus. No thunder answers. No wind changes. But the stars seem just a bit closer. Because tonight, the eclipsed titans are not eclipsed. They glow gently, not to demand worship, but to remind you that light and memory can come from places long ignored. And sometimes, the gods that don't shout are the ones who last the longest. You wake in the dark, surrounded by stone. But it's a different kind of dark. Cool, fragrant, and faintly musical. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays a low, trembling note. You rise slowly, feeling marble beneath your hands. You've slipped quietly into the realm of oracles, not the ones who spoke for famous gods, but the forgotten dreamers who channeled deities no one remembers. You're in a hollowed mountain shrine, small and soot-streaked. Not Delphi, not Dodona. This is Thera, or what's left of it, buried under ash for centuries, and with it, dozens of altars to spirits we've never properly cataloged. You trace your hand along the inner wall and find a symbol, a spiral pierced by a downward-pointing arrow. Beside it, the word Sirah is carved. No surviving hymns, no backstory. Just one scholar's theory that she was an oracle goddess of sinking dreams, visions that revealed not the future, but buried memories. You walk outside and find yourself in a low grove overlooking the sea. Wild fennel grows waist-high. Scattered across the ground are thin slabs of stone, each painted with a single eye, some closed, some weeping, some stitched shut. It's said that oracles of forgotten gods often had their own pantheon, personal deities that only they could hear, divine confidants who never made it into the major myths. They were known as the strangers, a loose term for the gods of isolated visions, half dream, half divinity. Historians still argue whether this was a cult, a mental condition, or a priesthood lost to time. But dozens of altars have been found along isolated coastlines and caves, each bearing unfamiliar names and cryptic prayers carved in local dialects. One such name is Aveneo, found etched into the base of a broken lyre beside a long-dead spring. The associated glyph? A mouth filled with stars. You sit on the edge of the dry fountain, trying to imagine worshiping something so undefined. These weren't gods with temples or rules. They were moods, forces, shivers in the spine. A quirky little find. One scroll fragment from Delos warns against oracles who speak in tongues unknown to men, for they serve the listening gods whose ears face the void. Creepy, sure, but also kind of beautiful. You leave the spring and walk along a ridge where small votive offerings still peek out from beneath rocks. Bits of glass, woven thread, animal teeth wrapped in linen, not offerings to Zeus or Hera or even Apollo, offerings to someone. And then you find it. A low amphitheater carved directly into the rock with only 7 seats. At the center, a stone chair, oddly shaped, almost like a cradle. Etched along its back is a short inscription. She who sings, sings not for us. This may have been a seat of trance, a place where a priestess would channel voices from gods whose names couldn't be spoken aloud. A quiet ritual. No crowds, no spectacle, just the deep, slow work of remembering what others had already forgotten. You sit in one of the 7 seats. A gust of wind moves through the amphitheater, and for a moment, you think you hear someone breathing. Not loud, not urgent. Just a slow inhale, like the space itself is alive. You close your eyes. You picture the priestess, alone. Eyes rolled back, lips moving with the rhythm of voices no one else could hear. Her gods didn't need temples or tithes. They just wanted to be known, if only for a moment. And you think, maybe that's enough. Maybe gods don't vanish because people stop believing. Maybe they vanish because people stop listening. But not tonight. Tonight, you're here, with Sira'a and Aveneo and the strangers. You name them, gently, even if only in your thoughts. You let the silence stretch until it wraps around you like velvet. Some gods thunder, others whisper, and some only breathe. Morning light creeps in, not bright or brash, but filtered, golden, drowsy. You stretch, blinking against the sky, and realize you're somewhere else entirely. The breeze smells faintly of garlic, ash, and wet brick. The chatter of 1,000 voices rises and falls in a rhythm that feels eternal. You're in Rome now, but not the empire of marble columns and bloodied togas. This is the Rome of imported gods, of borrowed divinities sold like spices and whispered into alleyway shrines. Rome didn't just conquer lands, it collected gods. Packaged them, renamed them, smoothed their edges, and fit them neatly into its expanding bureaucracy of belief. But in that strange, imperial library of the sacred, many gods were shelved, forgotten, or never fully understood in the first place. You step into a narrow street just as a wooden door creaks open beside you. Inside is a lararium, a home shrine, tiny and tucked between a laundry rack and a half-eaten loaf of bread. There's a candle still burning and two small statues watching over a dish of olives. The one on the left is familiar. Mercury, probably. But the one on the right? Not so much. He's round-faced, crowned with wheat, and carries a basket of eggs. A bronze tag below reads, Tulare Fartus, he who protects the morning meal. Yes, Fartus. Was he real? Possibly. Romans had household gods for everything. Stairs, door hinges, even the pantry. Some scholars believe Fartus is a corruption or joke. Others suggest he was a localized deity absorbed from a forgotten Etruscan spirit. Either way, someone gave him olives, and that means someone cared. You walk through the streets, past bakeries and bathhouses, each marked by chalk signs offering prayers in miniature. Some name Cloacina, goddess of the sewer. Others thank Robigo, spirit of wheat blight. And then there's Verminus, the god of worm infestations in cattle. Divine niche marketing at its finest. You turn into a quiet courtyard. Ivy coils up terracotta walls. A mural fades across the stone, showing a woman with 3 arms, one holding a scroll, one a scale, and one lifted in silence. No name, just a title. She who decides without witness. You sit beneath her painted gaze, her story, lost. No surviving statues, no temple records. But versions of her appear throughout the provinces, in wall carvings, in rings worn by judges, in the margins of legal scrolls. She may have been a goddess of private justice, invoked when no one else believed your side of the story. Historians still argue whether she was a Roman invention or a Gallic import from older tribal law traditions. Either way, she was revered by the quiet, the wronged, the falsely accused. A quirky discovery. In Pompeii, a household fresco was found depicting a dinner scene where a tiny version of this goddess hovers above the table, gently tipping a guest's wine cup over. Beneath it, in Latin, even truth drinks. No one knows what it means, but it's poetic chaos. You leave the courtyard and descend into a cool cellar lit by flickering oil lamps. This is a Mithraeum, a shrine to the god Mithras, whose worship exploded in Rome's later years. His rituals were secret, his followers mostly soldiers, and his myths baffling. A bull, a dagger, a cave. The cosmos birthed in blood. But even here, hidden behind Mithras's dominating altar, is a niche with a half-broken sculpture of a woman holding a mirror and a lily. No inscription, no explanation. Just a single faint glyph scratched below. For Nolia, who forgives without forgetting. She's unknown to all major Roman texts, but in a single soldier's journal, she's referenced once, described as the one I spoke to when I could not speak to the others. A goddess of private grief, perhaps, of slow healing. Or maybe just the idea that even within a pantheon of conquest and order, there was still room for something gentle. You sit quietly for a while. The lamplight flickers. The mirror in Nolia's hand catches it just right, bouncing a soft circle of light across the stone ceiling, like a halo or a spotlight for a god who never wanted one. Outside, The city moves on. Crowds chant for Jupiter. Priests march in Saturn's name. Senators offer public prayers no one listens to. But here, in this forgotten cellar, in this nameless courtyard, and inside crumbling larariums across Rome, the imported, inherited, and invisible gods still dwell. You whisper them a quiet offering. Fartus, Cloatina, she who decides. Robigo, Nolia, strange names, soft names, real names. And in return, you feel something settle in your chest, like exhaling a breath you didn't know you'd been holding. Your footsteps echo now, not across stone or earth, but along soft, mossy ground beneath a canopy of trees so tall they seem to pierce the sky. The air is cool and green, filled with the scent of oak sap, damp soil, and something faintly metallic, like old bronze. You've left the world of empire and entered a different rhythm entirely. You're in the lands of the Celts now, where gods moved through mist, lived inside rivers, and whispered through leaves. Unlike the pantheons of Greece or Rome, Celtic gods weren't confined to neat stories or marble statues. They were places, moods, and moments. This is not Stonehenge, not touristy druid revivalism. You're in an overgrown grove far from any road, where trees grow in imperfect circles and stones are laid in spiral paths. You step lightly. The ground feels like memory. A glint catches your eye, an offering stone half buried beneath ferns. Upon it, the carving of a face, small, flat, with piercing eyes and a strange halo of dots circling its head. Beneath the moss, the name, Belatucadros. Not a household name, even in his prime. Belatucadros was a war god, likely worshipped in Roman-occupied Britain, though some believe he predates the Romans entirely. He wasn't a noble charioteer like Mars or a thunder wielder like Thor. His energy was darker, closer to the bone, to blood on wet grass and victory at terrible cost. But here's the strange part. His temples were tiny, more like roadside shrines, and the offerings were often copper coins, animal bones, or weapons broken intentionally, perhaps so he wouldn't turn his power against the giver. A god respected, not loved. Historians still argue whether Belatucadros was a distinct deity or just a local name for a Romanized Mars. But in these woods, he feels older than both. You whisper his name and move on. Deeper into the grove, you come upon a spring, its water so still it reflects the trees like glass. Beside it is another carved figure, more elegant this time. A woman seated beneath a crescent moon, her lap filled with apples. This is Ericura, a goddess of fertility, rebirth, and the slow turning of seasons. Ericura was venerated in the Roman provinces, especially Gaul and Germania. Some call her the Celtic Persephone. Others think she's a localized form of the Great Mother. Either way, she didn't need fanfare. She ruled over tomb gardens, grave sites filled with flowers and fruit trees, where death and life braided into one long, leafy breath. A quirky fact, Some inscriptions to Ericura were found on Roman gravestones alongside symbols of trade, suggesting she may have also guarded prosperity in the afterlife. Imagine being both a goddess of orchards and good accounting. You crouch beside the spring and dip your fingers into the water. It's icy. The kind of cold that wakes old thoughts. You sip, and for a moment, taste something metallic, iron, probably, or memory. The trees shift as the wind moves. You follow a path lined with white stones and come upon a boar-shaped idol, barely visible in the underbrush. It's squat, powerful, tusks cracked with time. This may have represented a forgotten forest spirit, one of the Tuatha, or tribal gods, who protected specific valleys, woods, or rivers. The Celts didn't always name their gods the way other cultures did. Many deities were local, tied not to identity, but to geography. You worship the god of your river, your hill, your wind. And once you moved, you found new ones. It made every forest sacred, every stream divine. You rest on a flat stone, covered in lichen, and listen to the forest. No voices, just breath, life, ancient patience. There's one more shrine, tucked behind a leaning oak that grows at an impossible angle. This one is different. 3 carved faces joined at the sides, each expression unique: joy, sorrow, stillness. This is the Triple One, known by many names across Celtic lands: the Matres, the Morigna, the threefold mothers. They could be war, or wisdom, or fate. No one agrees. Some tales say they were sisters. Others say they were 3 aspects of the same cosmic truth. Either way, they were powerful and absolutely not to be trifled with. You bow your head. The ground beneath you feels alive, pulsing with memory. This grove remembers. It doesn't ask for worship, just presence. So you sit, and you offer silence. And for once, that's enough. Belatu Kadros, Ericura, the Boar Lord, the 3. Tonight, in the hush of the Celtic grove, they rise, not with thunder, but with moss and breath and the sound of leaves exhaling. You rise with the morning fog still clinging to your shoulders, the damp of the Celtic grove fading into cool air tinged with sea salt and ice. The trees thin, the earth hardens. The wind begins to carry a different kind of chill, one that smells of pine, stone, and long winters. You follow it, your breath fogging before you, as you cross into the myth-cloaked lands of the Norse. But not the Norse you might expect. This is not Valhalla, with its shouting warriors and endless roast feasts, not Odin with his ravens, nor Thor with his hammer. Tonight, you're here to meet the ones who came before, the forgotten gods that existed in the quiet spaces before Asgard claimed the sky. You stand at the edge of an ancient forest, its trees dark and dense, their branches tangled like runes scrawled in the air. A narrow trail winds inward. You follow it, past standing stones etched with spirals, not the usual jagged Norse motifs. These are older, wilder, a script that curves instead of cuts. At the base of one stone, a weathered carving shows a woman with a serpent around each arm. A line of text in Old Norse wraps beneath her feet. Vur, she who listens where others judge. Vur, a goddess of awareness, insight, and secrets. But not in the cunning way of Loki. Vur was quiet, attentive. Some believe she could hear a lie before it was spoken. Her worship didn't involve sacrifice, but silence. Time spent still enough for truth to surface. Historians still argue whether Vur was ever widely worshipped or simply a poetic personification, but sagas mention her as a witness to oaths. And in some burial sites, her name appears scratched into the underside of rings, hidden, private, sacred. You keep walking until the trees open up into a clearing. There, half swallowed by frost and bramble, stands a wooden totem. It's tall, wide-shouldered, and crowned with carved feathers. A face looks out, not stern like Odin's, not fierce like Freya's. This one is tired, gentle, even. This may have been a shrine to Ullr, a god of winter, hunting, and the long patience of snow. Ullr was once more prominent than even Thor in certain regions. He ruled over gliding, archery, and survival. But as Norse myth evolved toward war and honor, Ullr's quiet resilience faded into the background. A quirky thing, some Viking ski routes still bear his name, and old prayers invoke him to hold the cold back just long enough for a traveler to pass. Imagine that. Divine intervention to avoid frostbite. Relatable. You sit beneath the totem, feeling the cold settle into your bones, not uncomfortably, but with purpose. The Norse gods you meet tonight are not loud. They're the stillness before storms, the space between breaths, the crackle of snow beneath booted feet. Farther into the clearing, you find a circular ring of stones, each etched with symbols now half gone. In the center, a raised platform of earth with a single blackened branch thrust upright. This may be one of the few remaining altars to Nos, a daughter of Freya, goddess of desire, memory, and treasured things. But here, in this context, she feels different. Less seduction, more reverence. Perhaps an older form, Nossa, the spark within. It's believed her followers left tokens here, small items tied to deep emotion, broken jewelry, locks of hair, fragments of letters, not for worship, for release. You crouch beside the blackened branch. Tied to its base with twine is a small bag of stones, each etched with a single letter. A forgotten prayer, maybe, or someone's grief, buried in runes. And then, softly, it begins to snow. The flakes fall slowly, without urgency. You tilt your face upward and let the cold kiss your eyelids. There's no fear here, just a sense that time has folded in. Like the edge of a thick wool cloak. You whisper names, Vur, Ullr, Nossa. And for a moment, the wind hushes. The Norse remembered their gods in saga and song. But these ones? They lived in the pauses, the quiet before a sword was drawn, the warmth of a fire no one had to earn. You walk from the grove of faded gods, not triumphant, not transformed, just held. Like something ancient recognized your presence and nodded once, before fading back into the snow. You descend from the snowy hush of the north, following a breeze that smells of spice, fire, and distant thunder. The sky shifts, deeper now, wide with twilight. You feel the air thicken with smoke and incense, the ground beneath you warmer, drier. You've arrived under the Vedic skies, in the cradle of ancient India, where gods once rode chariots of wind and fire and drank celestial brews to set the cosmos in motion. But tonight, you aren't meeting Indra or Agni or any of the great devas etched into temple walls. You're here for the subtle forces, the vanished divinities, the gods who walked beside humans before the Vedas were even sung aloud. You find yourself in a small, neglected courtyard. A peepal tree spreads wide, its roots thick as serpents and older than the stonework below. Scattered along its edge are broken terracotta figurines, some human, some beast, some somewhere in between. Their faces are worn smooth, but a few retain faint expressions, a smirk, a gaze skyward, a look of patient focus. This was once a shrine to Aryaman, one of the older Adityas, gods of social order, hospitality, and vows. Aryaman wasn't flashy. He didn't wield weapons or fly across the sky. Instead, he sanctified the spaces between people, the unspoken agreements, the subtle obligations, the kindness of strangers. He was once invoked during marriages, treaties, and even farewells. Historians still argue whether Aryaman was ever worshipped independently or merely honored in rituals as part of the cosmic background. But early hymns suggest he was vital. Without Aryaman, society unraveled. You run your fingers along a stone basin where offerings were once poured, likely ghee, milk, or honey. Sweetness for a sweet-natured god. Now, ants claim what's left. Even that feels appropriate. You move on, toward a low hill crowned by a collapsed structure, half temple, half earth mound. Here, at the threshold, you feel a sudden gust of dry wind. It sings like a flute, curling around your ears. A single name seems carried on the breeze, Vayu, god of wind, breath, and unseen motion. Today, he's mostly remembered as the father of Hanuman, or as a directional deity, but older hymns speak of him before all that, as the cosmic exhale, the mover of clouds, the first rhythm of existence. The Rig Veda calls him the roaring wind who drives the shining chariot of dawn. You stand at what might have been his altar, a circle of stones set low into the ground, open to the sky. No roof, no walls. Vayu needs no shelter. A quirky note. In certain ancient texts, Vayu is described not just as a god, but as a companion of Soma, the divine elixir. He alone was said to accompany Soma during the first taste. A wind god with VIP access to the universe's most sacred cocktail. Respect as you step across the threshold, a new scent wafts toward you, smoke and iron. You find yourself in a smithy, abandoned, stone forge half collapsed, tools rusted into silence. A faded painting on the wall shows a man with flames for hair and a serpent coiled around his waist. No name remains. But from nearby inscriptions, scholars have guessed this may be a depiction of Ela, a deity of transformation, ritual, and gender fluidity, sometimes male, sometimes female. Ela appears in Vedic lore as a shapeshifter, guide, and ritual innovator. They were invoked during certain transition rites, birth, renaming, coming of age. Historians still debate whether Ela was a mythological figure or a symbolic title for priests. But for generations, Ela was honored at the edge of boundaries, physical, social, and spiritual, a god of the in-between. You sit near the forge, feeling the warmth of the old stones, still sun-kissed. The wind rustles the leaves outside. You imagine the prayers once spoken here, soft, secret, hopeful. Aryaman, Vayu, Ela. These aren't gods of thunder or war. They don't demand. They invite. They ask you to notice the breeze on your cheek, the contract you didn't sign but still honor, the change you feel but can't yet name. And tonight, under the Vedic sky, they return, not as fire and glory, but as breath, as oath, as whisper. The warmth of the Vedic plains lingers on your skin, but the air shifts once more, growing drier, thinner, edged with grit and the sting of desert wind. You find yourself beneath a sky the color of copper, in a land shaped by silence and sandstorms. The rocks are sun-scorched, the trees twisted, the stars sharp as obsidian. This is the ancient land of pre-Islamic Arabia, where once gods were carved not in marble, but in the bones of dunes and in the hollows of date palms. Tonight, you're not here for dynasties or dynastic gods. You've come seeking the desert deities, those whispered in marketplaces and sung to by caravanners, long before the crescent moon flew above mosques. Your first steps take you through the ghost of a city, a settlement long abandoned, its walls crumbled, its wells dry. But here and there, signs of sacredness remain. A blackened rock too smooth to be chance, incense residue in the cracks of old altars, and the faint impression of carved names scratched into the wind-worn cliff faces. One such name is Al-Lat, once widely revered across Arabia. Al-Lat was a goddess of fertility, earth, and protection. In some regions, she was the mother. In others, the daughter. Sometimes even an aspect of the moon. She was worshipped in round sanctuaries, often symbolized by unshaped stones, aniconic, unassuming, and yet deeply powerful. You enter one such sanctuary, a circle of stone pillars surrounding a basin long since dried. At its center, a smooth white stone, still standing. It's cold to the touch, despite the heat. Around it, the ground is scattered with ancient glass beads and fragments of frankincense charcoal. Simple, sacred, unpretentious. Historians still argue whether Al-Lat was separate from or synonymous with goddesses like Aphrodite or Artemis due to cross-cultural fusion. But to the people who lived here, she was personal, present in the sandstorms, heard in the night winds. You move onward, stepping into a shaded pass between two great stones. The wind tunnels through it like a flute. There, etched on the wall in ancient Talmudic script, is a name barely legible. Manat, the goddess of fate, the quietest, the oldest, and arguably the most feared. Manat didn't bless you. She measured you, the length of your days, the weight of your choices, the texture of your end. Even her name comes from the same root as portion or measure. In her presence, everything was tallied, carefully, silently, and without appeal. You light a small fire in front of a flat rock thought to be one of her altars. A handful of wild herbs smolder, curling smoke into the sky. No statue, no face, just the awareness that someone or something is keeping score. And yet, Manat wasn't cruel, just honest, the kind of deity you honored with respect, not pleading. A desert accountant of fate, scribbling silently while you lived out your illusions of control. A quirky find. A merchant's journal from the Nabatean era describes an amulet with a stone from the valley of Manat, believed to prevent bad trades. The merchant admits it didn't work, but kept wearing it anyway, just in case. You travel west now, toward the coast where trade winds bring spice and story. There, carved into a sea-facing cliff, is a shrine so eroded it looks like time itself gnawed on it. But one thing remains, a crescent moon with 3 lines descending beneath it. This is the symbol of Al-Uzza, fierce, fiery, a goddess of protection and battle. She was the patron of warriors, travelers, and women who refused to stay small. Her name was invoked before battles. Her temples stood beside wells and oases, both literal and spiritual sources of life. You reach one such well. It's dry now, but someone, recently, maybe, has left a flower at its edge, a single desert lily. That's all she needs. Not gold, not temples, just a memory. Historians debate whether Al-Uzza and Al-Lat were different deities or regional aspects of one feminine divine. But the people who worshipped her didn't seem to mind the contradiction. She was both life-giver and sword-bearer, a goddess of oasis and avalanche. You sit near the well and whisper their names into the wind. Al-Lat, Manat, Al-Uzza. 3 names that once held empires in their shadow. 3 goddesses erased not by belief, but by decree. Their temples destroyed. Their stories burned. But even now, their echoes survive in folk memory, in language, in the bones of places no one dares map. The wind shifts, warmer now. You feel sand on your tongue, gritty and real. And just before you stand, you see something half buried beneath the edge of the well. A shard of bronze shaped like a crescent, edges dulled by time. You leave it there. It belongs to someone else's prayer. You walk out of the path. desert stretching ahead. The stars begin to rise, cold and vast. And somewhere among them, 3 goddesses lean in, listening to your breath like they once listened to 1,000,000 others. The desert fades behind you, its silence giving way to rhythm, footsteps, drums, the beat of wood on wood and voice on wind. The air grows thick with the smell of smoke, palm oil, roasted yams, and something else, older, something deep and red and gold. You are no longer in the sands of Arabia. You have crossed the continent, and now you walk the vibrant, spirit-drenched earth of West Africa. But don't expect monuments. Here, the gods live in movement, in story, in the breath between one drum beat and the next. They do not sleep in stone, they dance in fire, speak through griots, and rise in rhythm. And tonight, you're not here for the famous orishas or the thunder of Shango. Tonight, you're listening for the echoes, the quieter, older gods who came before the big pantheons took shape. You begin in a shaded grove outside what was once a sacred site near the Dahomey Kingdom. At the center of the grove stands a single baobab tree, so wide it would take 10 people to encircle it. Wrapped around the base are old beads, broken calabashes, and a carved wooden bowl filled with kola nuts. You kneel to examine the base and spot an inscription in Fon script. To Nana Buluku, first before all. Nana Buluku is often described as the primordial mother, the one who birthed Mawu and Lisa, the twin forces of moon and sun. But before all of that, she simply was. No temples, no commandments, just existence turned female. She doesn't speak. She doesn't intervene. She created and then stepped back. Some call her the grandmother of time. Others say she's not even a god, but the force behind all gods. Historians still argue whether Nana Buluku was part of formal religion or more of a cultural concept. But in quiet villages, you'll still find old women pouring water toward the sun in her name. You rest beneath her tree. A soft breeze rustles the leaves, and somewhere nearby, a goat bleats. You're not alone, but you are deeply safe. Further on, you reach a river, not wide, but swift and restless. At its edge, a flat rock bears a carved image of a face half hidden by swirling lines. This is the domain of Ajay, a god of the wilderness, game, and silence. Ajay was honored by hunters and those who walked alone. He governed both the physical forest and the metaphysical space between things. The silence before decision, the breath before a shout. His followers left offerings of carved ivory, feathers, or pieces of bark marked with signs only they understood. You step into the shallows. The water is cold, rich with minerals. Fish dart between your feet. On the opposite bank, you see something strange. A pile of stones shaped like a horned head, with eyes made from polished shell. Someone remembers him, or maybe he remembers them. A quirky note. Oral tradition claims that if you say Ajay's name aloud in the wrong part of the forest, birds will stop singing. Superstition? Maybe. But tonight, you don't try. You walk onward, past a village now long abandoned, the mud walls of its huts sunken inward. At the center sits a circular pit ringed with ash, the remains of a divination fire. This was once used to call upon unknown spirits, gods with names lost to even the griots. The locals referred to them only as the ones with soft feet. You'd never hear them arrive. But if your fire crackled twice, it meant they had, in the ashes. Someone has recently carved a symbol, 3 lines bent at the middle, like crooked knees, a joke, perhaps, or an old prayer. Historians can't categorize these kinds of deities. They don't fit into pantheons or comparative studies, but they endure in rhythm, in proverbs, in instinct. When a grandmother throws salt over her shoulder, when a boy hesitates before entering a forest path, when a drum beat skips just once to see if something's listening. You sit at the fire's edge and close your eyes. Drums rise in the distance, not loud, but present. You feel them in your chest before you hear them. The ground seems to breathe with them. You whisper names into the night. Nana Buluku, Adye, the soft-footed ones. And the drums continue, not answering, not stopping, just being, like the gods themselves. These aren't gods of doctrine. They don't need belief. They ride along the breath of culture, staying just long enough to be remembered, and never long enough to be defined. You rise, stepping back into the shadows. Behind you, the fire flickers once, twice, and then silence. Your path narrows now, winding through thick jungle and mist, until the trees give way to stone steps slick with moss and thyme. You hear nothing but insects, rhythmic, persistent, and the distant calls of birds with voices like flutes. You've arrived in the sacred lands of the Americas, long before their names were carved by empires. Here, the gods do not sit on thrones. They move in jaguar skin, in hummingbird wings, in the blood that once painted the temples and in the sky that still glows above them. But tonight, you're not standing before the grand figures, not Quetzalcoatl, not Inti, not Kukulkan. You're here to remember the ones whose stories crumbled with their cities. You begin among the low ruins of a forgotten Mayan village. Nothing like the towering temples of Tikal or Palenque. These walls were homes. These stones belonged to everyday people. And in one, half sunken into the jungle floor, lies a circular hearth ringed by clay carvings. Each one bears the face of an animal, a deer, a squirrel, a fish, a snake. None are labeled, but each holds a tiny offering bowl. This may have been a shrine to Ixmucane, the grandmother goddess of corn, weaving, and making things last. In major cities, she was honored in books. Here she was alive, woven into thread, whispered into food, cradled into lullabies. You sit near the hearth and imagine the prayers once offered here. Not for victory, not for gold, but for a healthy child, a good harvest, a dream that made sense by morning. Historians still argue how many gods the Mayans had. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Some say many were place-bound, existing only in specific valleys or caves. One such god, almost completely forgotten, appears in just one codex fragment as Zultecan, depicted as a frog holding a burning fan. Interpret that however you like. A quirky tidbit. Frog-shaped incense burners have been found throughout lowland Guatemala. Some theorize they represent rain gods. Others think they were part of funerary rituals. One archaeologist simply labeled the entire category unknown divine amphibians. Sometimes, even the experts give up. You continue deeper into the Andes now, high and breathless, where the Incan spirit world loomed large. Here, many of the gods weren't people-shaped at all. They were mountains, rivers, stones, each called a huaca. You approach a massive stone split down the center by an earthquake long ago. It was once a huaca, probably still is. Offerings surround its base, coca leaves, feathers, broken bowls, and is that a plastic comb? Someone's still praying here, even now. This particular huaca may have represented a guardian spirit of trade routes, unnamed in any surviving text, but remembered in folk maps drawn by early Quechua shepherds. In one account, it's referred to simply as the Split Watcher. No myths, just location, just presence. And then there's Mama Cuca, the spirit of the coca leaf. Not a god in the classical sense, but a being who watched over rest, healing, and the quiet ceremonies of chewing and dreaming. Spanish colonizers tried to erase her. Industrialists turned her sacred plant into something else. But in highland villages, she still receives whispered thanks and shared breath. You sit by a cliff edge and offer a coca leaf to the wind. The breeze carries it upward, no resistance. That's the answer. Further north, across mountains and time, you find yourself in what was once Teotihuacan, a place so ancient the Aztecs thought it was built by gods. The pyramids still stand, though scarred. You wander through a smaller temple, barely more than a platform now. On its back wall is a faded mural, half sun, half skull, surrounded by butterflies. Below it, a single word. Itztli. Not a god of war, not even of death. Itztli was a spirit of stone, sacrifice, and obsidian, a sharp force, a necessary pain. He had few temples, but every obsidian blade carved in his name was said to cut clean, even into lies. You rest your hand on the broken altar. It's cold, smooth, surprisingly intact. In one corner, someone etched a spiral that ends abruptly, maybe a symbol for what was lost, or maybe just a doodle from a bored priest. Either way, it lasted. You whisper their names into the jungle and air. Ixmucain, Zultecan, the Split Watcher, Mama Cuca, Itztli. Their temples may be dust, but their spirits live in the land, not waiting to be worshipped, just watching, just listening. And tonight, you walk with them, quietly, barefoot, remembered. The jungle breathes behind you, and with it the last echoes of obsidian gods and grandmother spirits. But your path shifts again, faster now, strange underfoot, as if time itself begins to melt sideways. You're not heading into a new land. You're heading into the edges of the known, toward myths so fragmented, so wild in theory, that even scholars struggle to whisper them aloud. Tonight, you arrive in the most unexpected place of all, Antarctica. No, not the cold science base, not the penguins and polite explorers. You've stepped into something far older, a land of ice and fire myths passed by sailors, dreamers, and the oldest navigators. Legends so strange they don't belong to a nation, a culture, or even a certainty. You stand on a cliff overlooking endless white. The ice below stretches in cracked, glittering veins. It looks like skin, if skin were made of moonlight. The wind howls. But beneath it, something else. A slow, steady hum. You find yourself before a jagged stone that juts from the ice like a broken tooth. Someone carved into its face a ring of dots surrounding a spiral sun. This symbol has no name, but fringe researchers have linked it to Polynesian star maps, claiming that certain oral histories speak of a land beneath the southern sky, watched over by gods who fell from the stars. One such myth speaks of the Sky Creators, a trio of beings said to have descended on fireboats, formed the clouds with their breath, and carved rivers through frozen ground using long tusks of light. You lean closer to the stone and notice something odd. Tiny shell beads embedded into the cracks. Shells in Antarctica? Scientists chalk it up to ancient trade drift. But stories say that the first gods shaped birds out of ice and taught them to carry oceans wherever they flew. Ridiculous? Maybe. But tonight, you're not here for the rational. A quirky find. In 1912, explorer Frank Wild documented a dream he had near the South Pole. In it, he described 3 figures made of frost and fire, standing on a plateau and pointing at the moon. He woke sobbing and never spoke of it again. The sketch he left behind shows a spiral, a cracked sun, and a bird with 6 wings. You walk along a crevasse now, the cold biting deeper than before. Ice walls rise on both sides, glistening like cathedral glass. In the distance, a structure looms, part cave, part ruin, part hallucination. This is the Temple of Windbones, a name given by a sailor whose crew vanished near the Ross Ice Shelf in 1847. According to his final journal entry, they found a white cathedral where the wind screamed names no one knew. One man fell to his knees and offered his gloves. Another began to sing. You step inside. The space is silent, frozen. And yet, it thrums. There are no idols here, no writing, just grooves in the walls, shaped like feathers, ribs, and branching stars. This isn't a temple for worship. It's a tuning chamber, a place to hear. You sit in the center and close your eyes, and then you hear them. Not voices, not songs, but movements, the shifting of light, the stretch of time. a feeling like being watched, not with eyes, but with memory. These gods don't judge, they don't answer, they simply exist. You whisper a name you don't know, something soft, something made up, and immediately the wind goes still. You don't know who they were. You're not sure they were ever gods in the usual sense, but they were witnesses to the beginning, perhaps, to the long silence before the first prayer. Some Polynesian myths tell of a southern land of bones and sky, where the last gods sleep beneath blue fire. You don't know if it's real, but you're here now, with the sky creators, the Firebone Temple, the bird makers, names lost before they were spoken. And tonight, you remember them, if only in shivers and frost and the wind's low hum in your ear. The wind fades behind you, and with it, the strange music of ice and myth. You step forward into a landscape you can't quite place. Neither time nor geography asserts itself. The terrain is shifting, layered, uncertain. You realize you're not walking through a place exactly. You're walking through memory. The shared dream of what came before. Here, gods weren't forgotten naturally. They were erased. You're entering the realm of the banned. Divinities outlawed, hunted, or condemned by decree. The ones who fell not because people stopped believing, but because people were told to stop. Your path is paved in broken icons. You pass shattered statues whose faces were chiseled off, their eyes scratched out, their names replaced with silence. One such idol stands before you now, once golden, now green with age, a serpent coiled around her neck like jewelry. A faint inscription remains at her feet, just barely visible. Tanit, once worshipped in Carthage and across North Africa. Tanit was a sky goddess, a protector of cities, associated with stars, fertility, and war. She stood side by side with Baal Hammon, ruling as both mother and guardian. But when Carthage fell, so too did her name. Declared heretical, linked with false idols, cast into darkness. You touch the base of her altar. It's warm, somehow. Or maybe you're just remembering her the way others did, wrapped in veils, bearing torches, whispering blessings to the sea. Historians still argue about the true nature of Tanit's worship, especially the ritual. Some claim human sacrifice. Others argue for poetic metaphor. But one thing is clear. When Rome came, she vanished overnight. By sword, by edict, by the flick of imperial ink. You walk further, into a narrow corridor of flattened stone walls. Their carvings smashed, but not destroyed. Here, another god lingers. Barely. Serapis, a hybrid deity invented by the Ptolemies to unify Greek and Egyptian religion. Serapis once had grand temples in Alexandria. He was part Osiris, part Hades, part healer, part conqueror. A religious remix. And for a while, it worked. People loved him, trusted him, until someone new came to power and declared him false. His statues were pulled down, his temples gutted, his name reduced to false idol in records written by those who replaced him. But here, tonight, in the quiet space between one breath and the next, you find a broken coin in the dust, his face still visible, half smile and all. You slip it into your pocket, not for luck, for memory. A quirky find. In a Christian basilica built over an old serapeum, workers found a floor tile with a hidden carving beneath, a palm branch and a snake entwined. It had been scratched into the stone upside down, as if someone hoped he'd return. You leave the corridors and emerge into a wide, roofless ruin. Charred stone, scorched wood. This was not abandoned. It was burned. At the far end stands a pedestal with only one word etched into its base. Warak. You've never heard of Warak. No scholar has written of him. But you see his symbol, a book engulfed in vines, open to a page with no letters. Perhaps he was a god of knowledge, forbidden texts, or wild wisdom. Maybe he was just imagined by the last person to pray here. But tonight, you speak his name aloud, once. And in return, a breeze stirs the ashes. This place isn't filled with echo. It's filled with interruption. Stories cut short, faith punished, worship flattened by regime, dogma, war. But that doesn't mean the gods are gone. They wait. Not for altars, not for redemption, for remembrance. You whisper their names: Tanit, Serapis, Warak, and all the others who were forced into shadow. And in that moment, a thought flickers. If silence was once a weapon, maybe tonight, memory is resistance. You bow your head, not in prayer, but in defiance, and continue forward. The burned stones fall away behind you, and the air grows soft once more, not silent, just hushed. A gentle rustle, a flick of candlelight, a child's laugh far in the distance. You're walking now not through ruins or temples, but through people, millions of them, scattered across time and continents. Their hands busy with rituals they no longer understand. Their mouths repeating words older than memory. Because not all forgotten gods vanished completely. Some were simply reborn under new names. Some were absorbed, hidden in plain sight. Cloaked beneath customs, masked by saints, buried under festivals, still dancing in the corner of the world's eye. Tonight, you walk among the ghosts within modern faiths. Your first step lands in a village on a festival day. Paper lanterns float overhead. Laughter echoes in the streets. But tucked in a side alley, an old woman lights a candle before a bowl of rice, water, and a coin. She bows 3 times and mutters a name no one else hears. A name passed from mother to daughter, skipped in the textbooks. This is Zhao Jun, the kitchen god of ancient China, once the household spirit of fire and domestic truth. Today, many families still perform his rituals without remembering his story. He ascended to heaven once a year to report on the family's behavior. And yes, he could be bribed with sweets, In many homes, the ritual has become symbolic. It's just tradition, people say. But Zhao Jun smiles anyway. Because that's how gods survive. You walk onward, now inside a church. Stone wall, stained glass, sacred silence. But above one arch, a carved image of a woman with a crown of stars and a serpent at her feet. Officially, she's Mary. But to those who know, she also carries the bones of Isis, Astarte, even Asherah. Historians still argue which goddess threads through the Marian image: the Mother of God, the Queen of Heaven, the sorrowful witness. But the layering is there. Prayers that what at once rose to fertility deities and sky queens still carry upward through candle smoke. A quirky note. In parts of rural Spain and Italy, local Marian festivals mirror ancient rituals to pre-Christian goddesses almost exactly. Same dates, same symbols, same songs with slightly revised lyrics. Coincidence? Not likely. You pass into a crowd now, bustling, colorful, chanting. It's carnival, or maybe Dia de los Muertos, or something else entirely. But beneath the masks and flowers, you spot a figure, bedecked in lace and bones, her smile eternal. This is Santa Muerte, beloved and feared in parts of Mexico. Officially, she's a folk saint, but her roots stretch deep into pre-Columbian death goddesses. Mictacasihuatl, queen of the underworld. In her candles, people pray for protection, justice, balance. Some say she's a blend. Others say she's someone entirely new. But either way, she is worshipped. You sit by her altar for a moment, candles flickering red and white and black, offerings of apples, cigars, and coins surround her image. A child leaves a lollipop. A man whispers a secret. And somewhere in that moment, an ancient presence smiles. You step away and into a quiet home. A mother rocks a baby to sleep, humming a lullaby passed down from her grandmother. Who got it from hers? The song references the moon, the wind, and a sister made of silver. There's no God here. Not officially. But the song holds something sacred. A deity reduced to lullaby, hidden in rhyme, preserved in comfort. You understand now. The gods never left. They just changed form. A dance becomes a ritual. A saint becomes a mask. A proverb carries a prayer. And in the middle of it all, people keep lighting candles without knowing why. And the gods, humbled, welcome the flicker anyway. You whisper names you barely know how to pronounce. Zhao Jun, Astarte Mary, Santa Muerte, Sister Silver. Not prayers. Not invocations, just acknowledgments. And in response, all around you, things continue. A stove clicks on. A church bell rings. A breeze moves the curtains. They're still here, in your grandmother's stories, in your neighbor's shrine, in the ritual you call habit. Not forgotten, just remembered differently. You walk now through a city layered like a cake, civilizations stacked on top of each other, their gods pressed down like petals between ancient pages. Every step you take touches a different century. And beneath it all, beneath the concrete and steel and asphalt, there are still temples, still altars, still gods. You are walking through the buried sacred, the divine spaces that lie beneath our feet. Your first step takes you through the streets of Istanbul. Minarets rise, trams rattle past. But under it all lies Byzantium, and before that, Constantinople, and before that, a city of shrines where statues of Cybele and Dionysus once stood proudly beneath open sky. You descend into an underground cistern, cool, damp, and echoing. At the far end, two Medusa heads rest at the base of columns, turned sideways, as if to avoid your gaze. Officially, they're decorative. Unofficially, they're a warning. Medusa, a creature turned villain, was once a protector, her face carved into doors and armor to scare away evil. And now, she props up plumbing. Funny how things shift. Historians still argue whether these heads were reused out of convenience or reverence. But even now, visitors toss coins near them, just in case. You surface into Rome, but you don't stop at the Colosseum. Instead, you duck into a nondescript church. Beneath it, a staircase. And beneath that, a Mithraeum. A hidden chamber once filled with torches, feasting, and secret rites to Mithras, the god of divine order through sacrifice. The church claimed the surface, but Mithras still holds the ground. In the dim torchlight, you spot a carving of the Tauroctony, Mithras slaying a bull, stars spinning above him, torchbearers flanking either side, a ritual frozen in stone. The deity himself, gone from memory for most, but beneath the cathedral, he still reigns. A quirky note. Some modern buildings in Europe have had construction halted due to unexpected pagan remains. In one case, a parking garage was redesigned to preserve a shrine to Mercury found beneath it. The company quietly built around it, literally leaving a God-shaped hole in their plans. You move now beneath Jerusalem, where history is densest. Each stone built on another, stories stacked like prayer books. Beneath the western wall lie channels of earlier worship, altars older than David, grooves carved into stone for sacrifices long outlawed. Here, ancient Canaanite deities once stood. El, Asherah, Baal, names now heretical, yet once spoken with hope. You run your hand along one of those grooves. It's shallow now, smoothed by time, but still present, still capable of carrying an offering, if you had one. And then, beneath a modern apartment building in Athens, you find something even stranger, an exposed fragment of an altar, protected behind glass. The building's residents pass it daily. Most don't notice. A few nod as they walk by. It's dedicated to Hecate, goddess of thresholds, magic, and roads not taken. Her statues were once placed at crossroads to guard choices. Now, one guards a lobby elevator, still watching, still weighing. You sit on a bench nearby and think about this. about all the layers. The gods aren't just in memory or myth. They're under us, right now, wrapped in subway tunnels, buried beneath malls, tucked under garden beds and parking garages. And when people pray today, even if they don't mean to, some of those prayers travel downward, through churches, through ruins, through stone. You whisper their names, not just the deities, but the cities themselves. Istanbul, Rome, Jerusalem, Athens. Places where the gods lie like roots, waiting, listening, maybe dreaming. And above them, life goes on. Kids play soccer, radios hum, streetlights flicker. But underfoot, the divine never really leaves. It just waits for you to remember where you're standing. You've walked through deserts and forests, temples and caves, fire and ice. But now your path slows, softens. The terrain underfoot fades into starlight, and the world around you blurs like fog in a morning mirror. You're not in a place anymore. You're in a threshold, the edge of dream, the doorway to rest. And as you cross it, you gather them. All the forgotten gods, not in a line, not in order, not ranked by power or followers or fame, but in fragments, whispers, symbols. You find yourself in a vast, dark hall, not cold, not empty, just enormous. The floor beneath you glimmers with names etched in glowing thread. Names once shouted in temples, now pulsing like a heartbeat beneath your feet. At the center of the hall is a pool, still, round, and impossibly deep. You sit beside it, and the surface ripples, not from wind, but from memory. One by one, their faces return. Telazani, with her 5 eyes and hollow mouth, watching over forgotten fish prayers. Nanshe, standing knee-deep in dream water, whispering truths to fishermen and mothers. Melkart, flaming at the edge of a Phoenician dock, holding a club of smoldering history. Arakura, sowing apple seeds in the graves of tired warriors. Ver, gazing into your thoughts before you speak them aloud. You see goddesses with no names, wrapped in starlight and sorrow, beings made of wind and clay, long since renamed or mislabeled. A child god with a frog smile and a bowl of fireflies. A deity of lost travelers whose only temple is the hush before someone says, "I'm sorry." You realize something. Not all gods were meant to be remembered with shrines or scripture. Some were meant to fade gently, to live a while, then sleep. Like stories passed from voice to voice until they soften into myth and hum. And yet, even the softest gods wish to be remembered. Just once more. You lean forward and whisper into the pool. I remember you. The water doesn't stir, but the stars above flicker, just a little. Somewhere in the deepest part of this hall, a drum beats once, slow, gentle, like a heartbeat from a long time ago. You look around and see a shelf, long and low, filled with offerings. Not gold, not incense, but buttons, stones, scraps of fabric, teeth, feathers, and a single playing card. These are the gifts of people who never knew the names of the gods they whispered to, but still reached out anyway. You smile. And then, like a librarian closing up for the night, you gather the gods, not to worship, but to hold. You tuck them into the folds of your memory. Their names, their scents, their quiet presences, all of them. Bela tu Kadros, Nana Buluku, Sira'a, Zaghil, Nosa, Santa Muerte, Aveneo, Crius, Tayet. So many gods, so many corners of belief, all woven together by one thread. They were real because someone once believed in them. And now, so do you. You rise, you step toward the far end of the hall, where the floor fades into stardust. One more breath, one more whisper. And as you pass through the threshold, a final voice follows you. Thank you. Your final steps are light now, your breath deeper, your limbs slower. The journey has taken you across civilizations, under ruins, through myth, and into memory. But here, at last, you arrive not in another world, but in a space between. It's not dark here, not really. The light is soft, silvery, shifting like smoke across the floor. You are in a circular chamber with no ceiling. Above you, the stars drift lazily, not fixed, but swimming, constellations unmoored. The walls are made of every material you've seen: stone, bone, shell, feather, gold, dust. Every culture, every time. This is not a temple, not a crypt. It's a library of gods. Each shelf holds no books, but objects, symbols once sacred. You walk past a feather painted with stars, a cracked bowl still warm to the touch, a mask with one eye open and one sewn shut. A wooden carving of a face that changes when you blink. Each item holds a name, and each name holds a story. Here lies Yahuatal, the sky serpent whose breath carried lullabies across the Polynesian archipelagos. Here rests Maihun, the salt goddess of rivers that no longer flow. Here sleeps Gordamun, a god with two hearts and no mouth, worshipped by dreamwalkers on an island now under the sea. You reach a shelf that is mostly empty. Only one object rests there: a mirror. When you look into it, you don't see yourself. You see others. Faces turning toward the sky, fingers lighting candles, eyes closed in prayer. Not to a specific God, but to hope, to mystery, to something more. Historians still argue whether forgotten gods fade into nothing or simply step aside to let us grow. But here, in this chamber beyond time, they do not mourn their erasure. They do not seek revenge. They rest. They watch. They whisper through firelight and starlight and the stories we tell ourselves before sleep. You find a cushion by a low platform and sit. The floor hums beneath you, not loud, just enough to remind you you're not alone. One last offering waits before you, a stone tablet, blank. It's yours, to leave a name, to remember one more God, to invent one for yourself, maybe not to believe in, but to thank. Because even in forgetting, we grant the divine a kind of freedom to exist in silence, in song, in story, in rest. You breathe deeply, once, twice, eyes softening, and with a slow, full exhale, you remember everything. And now, dear traveler, you've reached the end of your journey. You've walked through dust and starlight, past temples and tombs, beside fire pits and frozen altars. You've whispered names that haven't been spoken in 1,000 years. You've lit candles with your breath. You've honored gods who once ruled oceans, trees, dreams, and time, and gods who never needed anything more than a single believer. Let it all fade now. Let the names drift from your tongue like dandelion seeds. Let the fire dim. Let the stone grow warm beneath you. These gods do not ask for worship, only for memory. And you have remembered beautifully. Feel the weight leaving your shoulders now, every muscle soft, every thought gentler than the one before. Let the story swirl like mist at your feet, wrapping around your ankles, your knees, your chest, cradling you in something old and vast and deeply peaceful. If your mind wanders, that's okay. The gods are still here. If you drift off, that's okay too. They were always meant to guard your sleep. You are safe now. You are remembered. You are held. The stars overhead begin to dim just a little. The soft hum around you slows. Your heartbeat, your breath, your body, gently slowing with it. There's nothing more to do tonight, nothing to hold, nothing to fix, just rest. Let go. Good night, traveler of lost gods. May your dreams be full of names that never needed to be known, to matter. End of script. Sweet dreams.